So the first thing that I remember this morning was a debate over African bishops, and that was they had a whole consent calendar before this that passed a whole bunch of liberal stuff that passed legislative committee. They didn't fight it. The conservative caucus groups are not fighting tooth and nail. They're not using any kind of parliamentary procedure to hold things up or gum up the works or put a bad feeling in the room. They see the writing on the wall. Um, a lot of people have been concerned about the part of the revised social principles that changes the definition of marriage. That, to my understanding, this is from an email that Mark Collins sent out on behalf of Mainstream UMC that did not pass by the required margin in order to get put on the consent calendar. So that's going to be brought to plenary one of these days. We got 4 more days of this. Morning and afternoon plenary sessions are scheduled. Anyway, there were things from there were some resolutions, a lot of resolutions actually on social issues, and then I don't know how much of it's binding. All this can get figured out, and if you don't know, Chris Ritter at peopleneedjesus.net has a whole compendium, a special document full of references to actual documents and text that you can look at. And somebody did ask earlier today, is there going to be like a comprehensive report when this is all over of all the things that have changed? And I'm sure that, yes, that will be somewhere. I don't know where that is. Probably not with me, but once I know about that, we'll get that out. So then the first thing on the floor of plenary that was being debated was the number of bishops. In 2016, a commitment was made to add 5 bishops to Africa. That has been walked back now because the financial picture has changed, because General Conference didn't come as quick as has always happened. We had this delayed annual conference for 4 years. And because the thing that I and many others have suspected is because Africa is conservative and the West does not want to contend with a conservative, growing, powerful Africa. So the less leadership, the less administrative structure they have, the better. That just means that they're more disorganized, that they're turned against each other, and that the West can continue to take advantage of procedural minutia, administrative know-how, all the machinery of the denomination being built over here so that they don't have to hand things over to Africa. A lot of this is already over. The debate on regionalization already took place last week and passed by more than a 78% margin, which was a surprise to a lot of people, including me, because it meant they got some Africans to actually sign on board with this. So now it's just about bishops, and they have a number of bishops that need to retire. They've served too long. Their bishops make too much money. Some of them live in the U.S. or they live in Africa like kings. They don't make as much as bishops in the U.S. make, but the U.S. dollar is worth a lot more in many places in Africa. So they didn't deal with any of those problems. They just dealt with how many bishops are in Africa. And there was a proposal on the table to add 2. There had been a Section C that added a 3rd bishop. They had removed that. And by they, I mean the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters. They're the committee that really controls the conference. If there was one committee that controlled it, it would be that one. They took that off the table. So 1 or 2 or 3 delegates from Africa tried to put it back on, but then it didn't work out. They tried to get a declaratory decision made on that by the Judicial Council, and that was turned down. And Ande Emanuel took his opportunity to advocate that they actually take away a new Episcopal area somewhere else and make a new one in Nigeria so that he could have one of them. And the reason I say that with confidence is because the guy has already started a Facebook group for his Episcopal candidacy. So anyway, he didn't get his way. They didn't approve the amendment, and then they approved the original motion. I don't think they amended anything on that one, and that took a long time. That they took a lunch break in between. They came back up. They made the decision, and then there were a series of reports that happened. But I had to check out for that. I had to put my kids down for a nap. So by the time I came back, there was a Westpath update. Bishop Robert Schnase introduced that. He's the one that sits at the head of their committee, and then he handed it off to Andrew Hendren, who wore a $1,000, more than a $1,000 belt up there to present. It was a loud outfit, light yellow. Um, he wore. I shared earlier in the day he makes $1.1 million a year, and he presented this new retirement plan for clergy that's down on board, in which he acknowledged. I mean, to his credit, he was somewhat transparent about how the financials don't look as good as would be ideal, and said they're going to do a new program called a Compass program, which is much more like retirement plans that you're seeing nowadays. It's a 403b nonprofit retirement account that is not going to have the perks that older generations got when the church was growing and flourishing. And there is some. I mean, it's I don't get like joy as I say, but like this is what happens when you prioritize a worldly ideology that is not not need nobody needs liberalism. Um, I don't know if I want to say it that way. Just the agenda, the worldly agenda that took over is not it's not needed. The world is already doing those things and doing them on its own terms. And meanwhile, most churches just don't find this theology and this worldview compelling. So they've been voting with their feet for a long time and their wallets. And now it's finally catching up to them. And that means that clergy who continue to serve or stepping up to serve don't are not going to do as well. And part of me is okay with that because nobody should be getting rich doing ministry, as I've said before. But when you've got just normal salt of the earth rural pastors that can't even do the job because you got to provide for the future of your wife and kids, it is what it is. So there are a lot of people who heard things that he said. We had some young people on at that point who just said, I don't like the sound of this at all. After that, General Board of Global Ministries and UMCOR presented Roland Fernandez, Katie Dawson, Renee Perez. They all the Perez report was not very long or detailed at all, but there was a lot of good feels around UMCOR, as there always is. They have a great reputation for doing good work. That said, there is a mission agency that broke off from them a couple decades ago, the Mission Society. I did a interview with their CEO now that they broke off because the name of Christ was not central to the mission, and they continue to make the name of Christ central to their mission. So if you check out tms.org, yeah, they don't call themselves the Mission Society anymore. TMS Global is what they call themselves. So excuse me for misspeaking. After that was a report from UMN. Bishops James Swanson and Gary Mueller had um, a kind of icky skit. Oh, and I guess I forgot to talk about the United Women of Faith presentation earlier in the day. They had dancers in skin tight leggings, and a whole dramatic, in your face presentation that I found very off putting, but I'm sure a lot of people loved. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. So same with UM men, and somebody said in the comments, and I would affirm that it does seem kind of on board with just kind of getting men to talk about their feelings and kind of feminizing them, and it didn't indicate to me that there's been any kind of sea change that's going to more effectively minister to younger men that are otherwise drawn to Andrew Tate. So, and hear me, I'm not saying that they should be like Andrew Tate. I'm just saying you got to get on that same bandwidth and be able to make the case for Christ. And I didn't see anything indicating that they're even having that conversation. Then they had a judicial council decision on a question earlier in the day on whether or not the Commission on General Counsel had to have a youth rep. They're in the middle of the nominations process. They couldn't find a youth because nominations were last done 8 years ago and no youth were nominated. And the judicial council decision said to my ears, yeah, you got to have a youth nominee, so find one. And then I'm not sure that any kind of procedure was lined out as to how they would do that. Then they had a Committee on Credentials report from Diane Brown. This was in response to a resolution, an order, I don't know exactly what it'd be called, from David Livingston of Mainstream UMC, Day One. Had the conference mandate a report on why it was that over 25% of the African delegation was not represented. Mrs. Brown was not happy to be up there. She was, she talked slowly because you got to do that for the interpreter, but she was frowning. She was kind of catty, and she did not really give the level of detail that would be required to alleviate doubt that there was some intentional measure uh, utilized by the staff of the General Conference to exclude the African voice. Until you can provide names and dates, it's all just hearsay, you know. So if in the end you're just going to have to trust me, well, then you might as well not even talk, because the whole thing is, one, they've proven themselves not to be trustworthy, but two, trustworthy people don't say you need to trust me. Then you had courtesies and privileges. They had a prayer for Palestine, but not Israel, or rather Palestinian protesters, a prayer against police violence, and then a prayer for tornado victims. And yeah, I'm in Oklahoma where some of those were. And then a prayer for peace in Gaza, Ukraine, and the Congo. And then the final development that I found worthy of note was Gary Graves gave an answer to the purpose of the Cosrose service that is scheduled this evening. At the very beginning of things today, this is something that really put a bad taste in my mouth. African delegates got up. It was during the committee, the recommendation for approval of the calendar or agenda. And here they had this service on the agenda that it said it was a service of repentance and acknowledgement of sin or something like that. And a couple of the African delegates and said, what are they going to be repenting for? We'd like to know this stuff before approving the calendar. And there was a refusal to answer the question. And then finally it was, okay, we'll answer it later in the day, but go ahead and approve the agenda, which completely undermines the purpose of that whole part of the exercise. If you're going to have agenda, I mean, just if you're not going to let people ask questions about the agenda, don't put it forward for approval. Just run with it, you know? So it just kind of exposes that it's a farce, and they really don't care about delegates, especially African or conservative. African still is synonymous with conservative, even if there are some delegates that are not. Um, so anyway, they did come back at the end of the day and said it was a service for repentance of sexual violence and abuse in the United Methodist Church, especially towards women, which you'd have to be pretty heartless to have a problem with. If they just said that earlier in the day, that would have been nice. Surely somebody from Cosro was there who could have represented that. Instead, it was just taken as an opportunity to show disrespect to Jerry Kula, who got disrespected on Saturday as well by Tom Berlin, who was the presider at that point. At this point, he has been told twice to find his seat because he's not going to get a better explanation than what he wants. So the man has the patience of Job. I don't know what to tell you.